So today, let's talk about what it really looks like to remain committed to someone while refusing to disappear in the process. Understanding the difference between loving someone and depending on them for everything. Love invites closeness, but it was never designed to make another person responsible for every emotional need we have. We'll explore why expecting one relationship to carry the entire weight of our happiness often creates pressure instead of connection, and how maintaining a healthy sense of self actually strengthens intimacy. One of the biggest myths many of us inherit about marriage is the idea that if two people love each other deeply enough, they should be able to meet every emotional need the other person has. Sounds romantic, it sounds comforting, and if we're honest, it's a story many of us desperately want to believe. Because if one person could be our source of comfort, confidence, security, joy, understanding, and peace, then love would feel wonderfully simple. But relationships aren't built to carry that kind of weight. I've learned that love grows best when it has room to breathe. The moment we begin asking another person to become our entire emotional world, we unknowingly place expectations on them that no human being can consistently fulfill. Even the healthiest, most devoted spouse will have days when they're tired, distracted, overwhelmed, grieving, or simply unable to offer what we need in that moment. Their limitation doesn't automatically mean their love is gone. Sometimes it simply means they're human. One of the things I find fascinating about human connection is that we often confuse dependence with intimacy. We think needing someone for everything is proof of how much we love them. But those are not the same thing. Intimacy isn't about losing yourself inside another person. It's about allowing yourself to be fully known while still remaining fully yourself. Research on healthy relationships consistently points to something that can feel surprisingly counterintuitive. The strongest partnerships aren't made up of two incomplete people searching for someone to finish them. They're built by two people who continue growing as individuals while intentionally choosing to grow together. That doesn't make the relationship less meaningful. It actually makes it more resilient. Think about the pressure we create when every disappointment, every fear, every lonely moment, and every hope has only one place to go. Eventually, the relationship begins to feel less like a partnership and more like an impossible job description. And when our spouse can't carry all of it, we often tell ourselves a painful story. Maybe they don't care enough. Maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe something is fundamentally broken between us. Sometimes none of those stories are true. Sometimes what's missing isn't more love. It's a wider foundation beneath our lives. Our identity was never meant to rest on a single relationship. We need meaningful friendships that remind us who we are. We need purpose that stretches us beyond our roles at home. We need moments of quiet reflection where we can hear our own thoughts instead of constantly waiting for someone else to tell us we're okay. We need practices that restore us, whether that's faith, creativity, learning, serving others, or simply spending time alone long enough to remember our own voice. And here's the beautiful part. None of that pulls us away from our marriage. It allows us to return to it with more steadiness, more generosity, and less fear. Because when your entire identity depends on one person responding exactly the way you hope, every disagreement feels like rejection. But when you know who you are apart from the relationship, you can experience disappointment without losing your footing. That's the kind of love that creates freedom instead of fear. It's the kind of love that says, I deeply need connection with you, but I won't ask you to become the only place where I find myself. And ironically, that's often the moment real intimacy begins to grow. When two people stop trying to complete each other and start showing up as whole human beings, they create space for love that is honest, sustainable, and deeply alive. Why self-abandonment often looks like love at first. Many of us learned that being a devoted spouse meant saying yes, staying quiet, putting ourselves last, and convincing ourselves that sacrifice is always the highest form of love. But over time, those small compromises can become a pattern where we no longer recognize our own needs. We'll uncover why losing yourself rarely happens all at once and how to recognize it before resentment takes root. The truth is, self-abandonment almost never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic moment where you suddenly decide, today I'll stop being myself. It shows up much more quietly than that. It looks like letting one disappointment slide because you don't want to start an argument. Then another. It sounds like saying, it's fine, when it isn't. It feels like convincing yourself that your needs can wait just a little longer because your partner has so much on their plate. And sometimes that's exactly the loving thing to do. Relationships ask us to make sacrifices. They ask us to be patient, to extend grace, to care for each other through seasons when life is simply hard. The problem isn't sacrifice itself. The problem is when sacrifice becomes the only language we know how to speak. I've noticed that many people wear selflessness almost like a badge of honor. We tell ourselves that if we're asking for less, expecting less, and needing less, we're somehow becoming better partners. But here's the question I always come back to. If your relationship only works when one person's needs are consistently pushed aside, is that really closeness or is it survival? That's not an easy question. Because for many of us, putting ourselves last wasn't something we chose as adults. It was something we learned much earlier. Maybe keeping the peace felt safer than telling the truth. Maybe you learned that love had to be earned by being helpful, agreeable, or endlessly understanding. Maybe you became so skilled at reading everyone else's emotions that you stopped checking in with your own. Those strategies may have protected you once. They may have helped you navigate relationships when you had very little power. But what protects us in one season of life can quietly limit us in another. One of the hardest things about self-abandonment is that other people often reward it. They praise your patience. They admire how giving you are. They talk about your strength because you never complain. And from the outside, it can look like you're holding your marriage together beautifully. Meanwhile, something inside you is becoming smaller. You stop sharing your opinions because it feels easier to agree. You stop asking for comfort because you've convinced yourself it's too much to ask. You stop pursuing the things that once made you feel alive because there's always another responsibility waiting. And after enough time passes, you may find yourself asking a heartbreaking question. When did I become someone I barely recognize? I've learned that resentment rarely appears out of nowhere. More often, it's accumulated grief. It's the quiet sadness of repeatedly leaving yourself behind while hoping someone else will notice what you've sacrificed without ever having to say it out loud. But people cannot respond to needs they don't know exist. They cannot honor boundaries that have never been spoken. And they cannot care for parts of you that you've spent years hiding. The courage isn't found in never sacrificing. The courage is found in knowing the difference between choosing sacrifice for a season and slowly making a home there. Healthy love leaves room for generosity, but it also leaves room for honesty. It makes space for compassion, but not at the expense of your own humanity. Because staying connected to yourself isn't selfish. It's what allows you to bring your full heart into the relationship instead of only the parts you've decided are easiest for everyone else to love. The transition naturally sets up the next section on having honest conversations without making your partner the enemy. The courage to speak honestly without turning your partner into the enemy. One of the hardest realities in marriage is accepting that someone can deeply love you and still have limitations. Instead of building walls of blame or silence, we'll talk about how honest conversations grounded in curiosity, respect, and vulnerability create space for understanding without requiring either person to become someone they're not. I've found that when our needs go unmet for a long time, our minds naturally begin trying to make sense of the pain. We tell ourselves stories. If they really loved me, they would know. If I mattered more, they would try harder. Maybe they've stopped caring. Those stories can feel convincing because they're born from real hurt. But hurt and certainty are not the same thing. One of the bravest things we can do is become curious about the story we're telling ourselves before we decide it's the truth. Curiosity doesn't erase accountability. It doesn't excuse harmful behavior or ask us to ignore patterns that need to change. It simply creates enough space to ask, is there another explanation I haven't considered? That question alone can shift the entire tone of a conversation. When we approach our spouse as the problem to solve, they often become defensive before we've even finished speaking. But when we approach the challenge as something we're trying to understand together, the conversation changes. Instead of standing on opposite sides of the room, we're standing beside each other, looking at the same struggle. That doesn't make these conversations easy. Honesty has a way of making us feel exposed. There's always the risk that we'll be misunderstood, that our vulnerability won't be met the way we hoped. And yet I've learned that avoiding those conversations usually doesn't protect the relationship. It protects the distance between us. There's a meaningful difference between saying, "You never make me feel important," and saying, "I've been feeling lonely and I miss feeling close to you." One invites shame, the other invites connection. One assumes motives, the other shares experience. It's amazing how often a small shift in language opens the door to a completely different response. I've also learned that listening is just as courageous as speaking. Sometimes our partner's experience won't match our own. They may have been carrying burdens we couldn't see. They may genuinely believe they've been expressing love in ways we haven't recognized. That doesn't invalidate our feelings, but it reminds us that every relationship holds more than one honest perspective. The goal isn't to prove who is right. The goal is to understand each other well enough to move toward something better. Because when honesty is paired with compassion, difficult conversations stop being battles to win. They become opportunities to know each other more deeply. And that's where trust grows. Not in the absence of hard conversations, but in the willingness to keep showing up for them with open hearts, steady courage, and the belief that love is strong enough to tell the truth. Building an identity that exists both inside and outside the marriage. A healthy relationship is made stronger when two whole people choose each other, not when one person disappears into the other. We'll explore why friendships, personal growth, purpose, and caring for your own emotional well-being aren't distractions from your marriage. They're part of what allows you to show up with authenticity instead of exhaustion. I think one of the greatest gifts we can give a relationship is bringing our whole selves into it. And that sounds simple until you realize how many of us have quietly stopped doing that. Somewhere along the way, our role became our identity. We stopped being a curious person and became only a spouse. We stopped being someone who loved learning, creating, serving, or dreaming. And we started believing that if our marriage was healthy, nothing else should matter quite as much. But here's what I've learned. A role can never fully contain a person. You are more than the responsibilities you carry, more than the routines you've built, more than the expectations that have slowly settled around your life. Those things are meaningful, but they are not the whole story of who you are. When we lose sight of that, something subtle begins to happen. We start looking to our spouse not only for love, but also for our sense of purpose, confidence, excitement, and direction. That's an incredible amount of responsibility to place on another human being. Even in the strongest marriages, no one can become the sole source of another person's identity. Research on long-term relationships suggests that couples often thrive when both people continue growing as individuals while remaining deeply invested in the partnership. Growth doesn't compete with commitment. It enriches it. Every time you learn something new, pursue a meaningful goal, deepen a friendship, strengthen your faith, or reconnect with a part of yourself that had been neglected, you bring fresh energy back into the relationship. I've seen so many people feel guilty for wanting something beyond their marriage. They wonder if taking a class, spending time with trusted friends, volunteering, pursuing a creative passion, or simply carving out quiet moments for themselves somehow means they're less committed. I don't believe that's true. In fact, caring for your own emotional well-being is often one of the most generous things you can do for the person you love. When you're constantly running on empty, every small disappointment feels heavier. Every misunderstanding feels bigger. It's difficult to offer patience when you've forgotten how to extend it to yourself. There's another reason this matters. Your spouse fell in love with a unique person, someone with interests, values, dreams, and a perspective that no one else could offer. That person deserves to keep growing. Not because growth guarantees a perfect marriage, but because staying connected to yourself helps you stay emotionally present with someone else. Growth doesn't mean drifting apart. It means refusing to let fear convince you that love requires becoming smaller. Healthy love makes room for curiosity. It celebrates each person's development instead of feeling threatened by it. It understands that two people can walk side by side without walking in exactly the same way. So if you've been waiting for permission to rediscover parts of yourself that have been quiet for far too long, consider this your invitation. Read the book you've been putting off. Reconnect with a friend who reminds you of who you've always been. Learn something that challenges you. Spend time in reflection. Pay attention to what makes you feel grounded and alive, because the strongest version of your marriage isn't built by two people who have forgotten themselves. It's built by two people who continue becoming more fully themselves and keep choosing to share that growing, evolving life with each other. That's the kind of love that creates both deep connection and lasting freedom. Choosing to stay without giving up the person you were created to be staying is meaningful only when it leaves room for honesty, dignity, and mutual growth. We'll reflect on what it means to remain committed while also honoring your own worth, recognizing that real love doesn't ask you to erase yourself. It asks both people to keep growing, keep listening, and keep choosing each other without losing who they are along the way. I think this is where so many of us find ourselves standing at a crossroads. Not because we've stopped loving our spouse, but because we're afraid that staying means accepting a version of ourselves that feels smaller than the one we once knew. We worry that commitment requires silence, that loyalty means never asking for more, that faithfulness somehow asks us to ignore the quiet ache inside that keeps whispering, "I miss who I used to be." But I don't believe love asks that of us. Commitment has never been about pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It's about choosing to remain present while telling the truth about what's real. That's a very different kind of courage. It's easier to perform the role of the endlessly understanding partner than it is to say with kindness and honesty, "I love you, and I also need us to keep growing." I've learned that relationships are living things. They either continue growing or they slowly become shaped by habits that no one intended to create. If one person is always adapting while the other remains unchanged, eventually the relationship begins to lose its balance. Not because either person is bad, but because love was never meant to rest on only one person's willingness to stretch. Choosing to stay should never mean giving up your voice. It should never require abandoning your values, your dignity, or the parts of yourself that make you feel fully alive. Those aren't obstacles to a healthy marriage. They're part of the foundation that allows one. There's a difference between accepting someone's humanity and surrendering your own. Your spouse will have limitations. So will you. Every marriage includes seasons where one person has more to give than the other. Grace matters in those moments. Patience matters. Compassion matters. But those seasons should invite conversation, not permanent self-erasure. One of the questions I return to again and again is this: who am I becoming because of this relationship? Not because relationships are responsible for our identity, but because they do influence it. Are you becoming more honest, more grounded, more compassionate, more courageous? Or are you becoming quieter, more fearful, more disconnected from yourself with each passing year? That question isn't meant to create guilt. It's meant to create awareness. Because awareness is where change begins. I've also learned that choosing yourself and choosing your marriage are not always opposing decisions. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for your relationship is to stop hiding inside it, to let yourself be seen again, to allow your spouse to know the real you, not just the version that's been working tirelessly to keep everything peaceful. There is no guarantee that every conversation will go the way you hope. There's no promise that change will happen overnight, but there is something deeply freeing about knowing you've stopped abandoning yourself in the name of preserving the relationship. Whatever happens next, you get to meet it as someone who is honest, present, and whole. Because love has always been at its strongest when two people choose each other freely, not when one person disappears so the other can remain comfortable. The goal was never simply to stay. The goal was to stay with integrity, with courage, and with enough self-respect that years from now, you can look back and recognize the person who walked through the journey.